Thank you so much, Jack, and welcome everyone. I will just grab my notes. First of all, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? If I go off mic or you can't hear me, just let me know, okay? Perfect. So, first of all, thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Jack. Really appreciate it. And there are 3 quick things I want to do tonight before we get to the talk proper. I want to acknowledge country. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. And I want to thank the volunteers who make this meetup possible. So firstly, I want to acknowledge that we're meeting tonight on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, Bunurong, Bunwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I particularly want to acknowledge that the languages of these people, once spoken on this land for 2,000 generations, lie sleeping. I'll be giving the talk tonight in English, which is something we don't often question. But I want to acknowledge that there are 250 other languages spoken in Australia, like Espanol, and many language speakers are the last speakers of their language. Secondly, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Reid, and I'm a doctoral researcher at ANU, where I investigate bias in speech technologies with a focus on the data that goes into those technologies. And I ask questions like, who is represented in that data? And more importantly, who isn't? Middle-aged women. For transparency, I also contract as a linguistic engineer for Mozilla's Common Voice project, but I need to be clear that this talk is not related to that role. Thirdly, I want to recognise that this meetup is a volunteer-run event, and I want to acknowledge the unpaid labour that goes into organising a meetup. It's tedious, it's hidden, and it's often unappreciated work. And I'd like you to join me in thanking Lizzie, Jack, Luca, and Sarah. Thank you. So tonight I'm going to explore a phenomenon I'm calling the token wars. Don't worry if you can't read the slide, I'll speak to them. The token wars are a resource conflict, and they're being fought right now on a web server, through a parliamentary inquiry, and in a courtroom near you. The token wars aren't fought with violent weapons on physical battlefields. They're being pursued through technical, legal, and political means. But just like armed conflict, there are innocent casualties. This is not collateral damage, expected, anticipated, foreseeable harms to civilians and infrastructure that goes alongside resource conflict. But instead, it's what I'm calling alateral damage. Unexpected, non-linear, distal side effects, unintended consequences that, trust me, you're already experiencing. Anyone done a Google search lately? What to the point? Anyone found what they needed on Google? Yeah. I'll have to know your trick. I'm going to unpack the token wars in 3 parts. The resources that are so in conflict are in tokens, and in part 1 of this talk I'll provide a basic technical grounding, although I suspect it's a very basic technical grounding for this audience, and how tokens and transformers are used to build large language models like Claude, Llama, GPT, Mistral, Falcon, and so on. In part 2, which is probably what you're not expecting, I'm going to use an economics lens to unpack why tokens are so valuable to AI companies. I look at how many tokens it takes to train an LLM and how tokens are becoming a scarce resource. I'll look at each of the actors in the token wars, and I'll look at what their intentions are and what alateral damage these actions are causing. In part 3, and this is where we get into the socio-technical system stuff, I'm going to consider tokens and data as a form of capital and as a form of treasure. And if there's anybody from Aotearoa, New Zealand in the house, Taonga. And I pose the question, how might we protect that treasure that they honour, both from those who want to take it, but more broadly, safeguarding that token treasure from a cultural and social perspective. And as we'll see, this state of affairs is challenging the open web, a vision of the internet where knowledge is shared collaboratively, openly, to benefit everyone. Then I'm going to wrap up by speculating a little bit on the future of the token wars, what's going to happen next, and then we'll open for questions. We'll have plenty of time for questions. Normally I take questions for this talk at the end. If you have a burning question, feel free to pop your hand up. I don't know if we have microphones, but what I'll do is repeat the question for the microphone. So, to part one. Tokens technically. So what's a token? And why are they so powerful for machine learning and generative AI? I like to think of tokens as building blocks, an atomic unit that's taken from a larger set of data called a corpus, and so that analysis or computation can be performed on that corpus. And the process of creating tokens from a dataset is surprisingly called tokenisation. And it looks something like this. Don't worry, all of you are going to scream at me because we both know it doesn't really look like this. It looks a little bit like this. Hold on to the fiction for just a moment. Here I've used character tokenisation to turn the sentence into an array of characters. And this approach might be useful for identifying character frequency in a corpus, but as we'll see, it's often the relationships between tokens that are really important. And there aren't really any relationships between these characters individually. But if I use word tokenisation, we can start to create relationships between the tokens. And the first step is to vectorise the tokens. So in machine learning, vectorisation is the process of taking non-numerical data, words, audio files, images, and turning it into numerical data so that it can be processed. Long and the short, it turns words into numbers. And vectorising gives each token a numerical reference so that it becomes possible to compute or create relationships between the tokens. I vectorised this sentence using a tokenizer, and you can see that it's added special tokens to the start and end. I won't dig into those now. But what's really interesting, in blue, or the darker font colour, you'll see that two of the references are the same, the 1996. And this corresponds to the word the in the sentence. So if I tokenised other sentences that had the word the in them, they'd get the same numerical reference. You're all with me. I was giving this talk previously to a much less ML savvy group. So now what we want to do is create relationships between the tokens. Who isn't familiar with attention is all you need? Yep, fair enough. So basically, Transformers 2017 blew away all of the sequential NLP algorithms that have been used previously, like bigrams and trigrams, etc. And Transformers use the attention mechanism. And this basically calculates how much each token focuses on or attends to every other token in the sequence. And it computes similarity scores based on the representation, so parts of the word, and the position in which the token occurs in the structure in the sentence. And it creates a weighted sum that determines how much each token's features contribute to the output of the model. But here's the part you might not have heard of before. When I'm explaining the attention mechanism in Transformers, when I'm explaining how these relationships get calculated, I use a cocktail party analogy. You might be wondering, what on earth does a cocktail party have to do with an attention mechanism? Stay with me. Say you walk into a cocktail party. You scan the room for faces that are familiar. Hey, John. And the people you like the most. And you're more likely to speak with them. You're more likely to attend to them. There are folks you don't know, at least not yet, until you get some more training data. And you're less likely to speak with, attend to them. You guess, for example, that the person standing next to somebody else is their partner, positional encoding, and that the teenager behind them is their child, because of the similar features. So if you ever need to explain the attention mechanism to someone, I find the cocktail party a really, really good analogy to do that. And of course, you know, if you have a very small cocktail party, you have a very small model, and different people are allowed into the cocktail party, which is all of your training biases. You know, you might have the cocktail party for beautiful people only, etc. So it's a very flexible, extendable analogy. I'll quickly jump through the attention mechanism at work so we can see what it's doing. It's creating token relationships between each of the tokens, and we can see how much each of the tokens, I'm just using word tokenisation here. I didn't really want to get into byte pairing coding, but we can see how much each of the tokens are attending to the other tokens, basically stronger or weaker relationship. So you can see we have quick brown fox. Quick is attending to fox, so we know it's the fox that's quick. We have fox attending to, or jumped attending to fox and jumped attending to over. And this is how we know that it's the fox jumping over something and it's not the dog that's jumping over something. And we have lazy attending to dog, so we know that it's the dog that's lazy and not the fox. There won't be a pop quiz, it's okay. So the way that we represent these relationships is through word embeddings. And again, I feel like I'm covering really known ground for this audience. So word embeddings capture the semantic closeness, how similar words are in meaning, through several axes or dimensions. And so, for example, we can see here that brown is very closely associated with the concept of colour, and fox is more associated with the concept of colour, but dog is not, because we haven't fed it any information about the colour of a dog. It just doesn't know what colour. Dog is not associated with colour. And so those are the attention weights and embeddings from just one very short sentence. But what happens with tokens and attention weights and embeddings at scale? Scale, scale, scale. Imagine now that a transformer is applied to a much larger body of text, billions of tokens, say all of Reddit or Stack Overflow or all of the public internet. We can start to see the power that transformers have in inferring relationships, embeddings between the tokens. And we can see how the data, the tokens that are used to train transformer models, encode the patterns, the frequencies, the biases of the data that they're trained on. And we're probably also familiar with the generation algorithm of transformers as well. It's those relationships that are used when we ask ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini to generate text as an output using a prompt as an input. So at their heart, LLMs are essentially next token predictors. Given the relationships that were created between tokens during training, all these millions and millions of calculations of similarity and position between tokens, the LLM can query those relationships and predict, using probabilities, what the next token should be. And the mathematical formula looks something like this. It's basically saying, calculate the next token in a sequence, given what I know about the relationships between words that are represented in my word embeddings. And now for the fun part. I'm going to try this with you all, because you're all human implementations of large language models. So if I said the input phrase a long time ago, galaxy far, far away?
There was. But that was
Mm-hmm.
different cultural training in the last where there was.
Different training data. I'm going to try another one. I think the audience is possibly too young for this one. The sky was the colour of television. Thank you. Someone's reading their Gibson Canon. Fabulous. So right, you get this. My point is that large language models predict what they're trained on. In this case, George Lucas science fiction films or William Gibson cyberpunk novels. So John was trained on William Gibson cyberpunk novels. So, that's a brief introduction to tokens, transformers, and how transformers use the attention mechanism to to infer relationships, embeddings between tokens that they're trained on. And we've had a glimpse of how powerful transformers can be at using those embeddings to generate content. So we can start to see why tokens, the raw material for AI models, are so important. But I still haven't fully answered the question of why tokens are so incredibly valuable. And that takes me to part 2 of the talk. In this section, I'm going to explore token economics. And because I love languages, I've created a portmanteau of token and economics called tokenomics. I might copyright it, I might not. But I'm going to try and show why tokens are so valuable economically. I'm going to take a look at the actors in the token wars, their intentions, their actions, and explore some of the alateral damage that's happening, the unintended consequences of this resource conflict. And now I'm going to switch gear from ML 101, LLMs 101, to economics 101. I'm going to draw on Elinor Ostrom's work on governing the commons. So as someone who was in open source for a very long time, this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, but not everybody who goes to a machine learning meetup is familiar with governing the commons. Elinor Ostrom distinguished, she has passed, she distinguished resources through 2 characteristics: excludability, whether the use of the resource can be effectively denied to others, and rivalry, whether my use of a resource depletes the resource for others. And by combining these 2 characteristics, we arrive at 4 different types of resources. So 2x2 grid, economics, we're in different disciplinary territory now. So personal property is both excludable and rivalrous. That's my chocolate bar, it's not available to you, it's excluded, you're excluded from it, and if I eat it, which I most assuredly will, it's depleted, it's gone, no one else can have it. Common pool resources are available to everyone, but if they're used, they're depleted, like fisheries, potable water, public car park spaces. Club or toll goods are available to members or subscribers, but one person's use of them doesn't affect the use of them for others. So if I stream Netflix and you stream Netflix, my streaming of Netflix shouldn't, all other things be considered, interfere with your streaming of Netflix, Sam. And then public goods are available to everyone. And if people use them, they're not depleted, like open source software, fresh air, national parks, beaches. I mean, there's some corner cases. If we have 2 million people on a beach, it is depleted, but in general. So, at first glance, we might think that tokens, because they're digital, are public goods. They're available to everyone. They're just there on the web, ready to be harvested through Scrapey. And because they're digital, they can be copied. If I scrape a bunch of tokens, I'm not excluding them from use by others. This is wrong. I've just set up a straw argument for anyone who's following the logic of my talk. Here, I argue that tokens need to be thought of as rivalrous, meaning that they're either common pool resources, everyone can get at them but they're depleted, or they're private property. They're my chocolate bar that you can't touch. But why are tokens rivalrous? Why does my use of a token deplete it and make it less usable for others? What a great question. Let me answer that next. So firstly, in general, the more tokens a model is trained on, the better the model performs. It's more accurate, less hallucination, able to be applied across a wider range of tasks. It's more generalisable. And in the last couple of years, we've seen an explosion in the number of tokens used to train models. The graph uses published data here. This is something I put together. But some of the later models, like Gemma and Claude 3, are estimates because that data hasn't been released by Google or Anthropic. But you can clearly see the trend. LLMs of 2024 were trained on orders of magnitude. It's not a logarithmic scale, it's linear. Orders of magnitude more tokens than LLMs of just 5 years ago. orders of magnitude. Which begs the question, it's on GitHub, I've made this publicly available, it's got the data in it and the references. How many tokens are there in the world? So we're getting to the point now where models are trained on nearly all the publicly available data in the world, entire world. This work by researcher Mark Cummins at the University of Oxford, it's a fantastic blog post. He basically calculates using a whole heap of very, very well thought out heuristics how many trillions of tokens there are in data repositories across the world. And his guess is 60 to 160 trillion tokens on the entire public web. If we take Claude 3 Opus, and we think that the estimate of 40 trillion tokens for its training set is correct, which is basically what most of the estimates are saying, then Claude 3 Opus is trained on about 2/3 of the public data in the entire world. This phenomenon, the fact that models are beginning to exhaust all the available tokens in the world, is being labelled the token crisis by this chap. I don't know who he is. And this is now being started, tokens are now being started to be called the fossil fuel of AI, because they're getting harder to find and they're more expensive to refine, just like petrocarbons. So models now require more and more data to train on to be considered state of the art. But that still doesn't explain why tokens are rivalrous, why if one actor has them, it depletes them for others. Surely, if I scrape the whole entire world web for tokens and you scrape the whole entire world web for tokens, we can both use those tokens? No. No. And I've lost my spot, sorry. So the key purpose of large language models, apart from, marketing hype, is to generate text. That might be for a cover letter to apply for a job, it might be to create copy for a website, or generate clickbaity marketing posts for social media. And when an AI model produces data, we call the resulting data synthetic data. I'm being polite here. Some of this synthetic data is high quality. So in the NLP space, in medicine, in pharmaceutical, in stuff that is heavily regulated with HIPAA type laws, we have, it can be very useful because we have scarce real data due to regulations, particularly health and medicine. But some synthetic data is very poor quality, and it's better known as AI slop. So, if we imagine all of the models out there, GPT, Claude, Gemma, Falcon, Mistral, Gemini, being used to generate synthetic data, AI slop, at scale, we can see how the internet is filling up with synthetic content. We've all done Google searches recently where we can't find what we're looking for because the top results are stuffed with SEO optimized AI slop. There are whole websites now filled with AI slop, just geared to getting to number 1 on Google. What a great use of compute and water and data centers. So this is one example of alateral damage in the token wars. The unintended consequence that the internet is now so full of AI slop that it's getting harder and harder to find the content you're actually looking for. This wasn't intended and it wasn't exactly foreseen, but it's now a consequence that I use Linux, I can't be considered a regular internet user. Well, it's a consequence we're now dealing with. And we even have the term, wait for it, slop squatting, to refer to actors, threat actors, creating malware with the same name as software libraries that are frequently hallucinated in AI coding assistants. If you Google slop squatting, maybe don't Google it. At least not without a VPN. But this is again another case of alateral damage, an unintended consequence of tokens. But if you're an organisation that's scraping the web to gather tokens, the proliferation of AI slop is deeply, deeply problematic. Because there are models, there are models that can try and distinguish between human-generated and AI-generated content, but they're not super accurate, and they're plagued with problems. For example, they tend to flag content by people who speak English as a second or third or fourth language as AI-generated, when it's not. So it's hard to detect synthetic data. And the problem this can cause with LLMs is model collapse. Model collapse is where a model reduces or constrains its outputs. It narrows the diversity of its output range. And a good analogy here, if the cocktail party wasn't enough, a good analogy here is that if you've ever taken a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, and if you're under 30, a photocopier is... Oh, no, you get what I'm saying. It degrades over time with each copy. You lose something with each iteration. It degrades its entropy. And model collapse is caused by training a model on synthetic data, AI slop, because AI slop is like a photocopy of the original. And so if a model is then trained or fine-tuned on synthetic data, there's a constriction on the diversity of what it can generate. And this is model collapse. Models trained on human-created data have more diversity, more variety in their outputs. There are 8 billion humans, and not a one of us is alike. But collapsed models are grey and beige and boring because AI slop is grey and beige and boring. And so now we see the key reason why tokens created from human-written, human-generated data are rivalrous. Because the internet is polluted with AI slop, synthetic data, just like a depleted fishery or a waterway that has been mismanaged. So that's a little bit about why tokens are so valuable. The token crisis means we're reaching hard limits on how much data is available to train on, because LLMs are basically training on everything. And the prevalence of synthetic data, AI slop, means that good tokens, human-generated, diverse, authentic, real, are hard to find. And we've seen the alateral damage that's harmed our ability to search the internet along the way, and some other things. And because tokens are valuable and they're rivalrous, it's understandable that they're a contested resource. So who are the adversaries in the token wars? And what intentions do they have? What alateral damage are they causing? Let's see the roster. Content creators, individuals such as artists, videographers and writers are key actors in the token wars, because it's often their work, publicly available on the web, that is scraped and harvested for tokens without consent or remuneration, and often in violation of copyright. And we've seen lots of examples of this. One key concern for this group of actors is how to prevent their content, their original works, from being scraped and harvested for tokens. The other concern is, now that their works have been harvested, how might they seek redress and compensation retrospectively? One of the ways content creators are addressing their concerns is by suing the companies who make ML models, very American flavour, with the key legal arguments resting on copyright law. And as individuals, it's often hard for creators to have their voice heard. So what we're seeing representative groups do some of the suing, like groups of recording artists or authors, what we're seeing at the moment is an unexpected, unintended consequence. Groups of individual creators have banded together to bring legal action. So we're seeing the emergence of ad hoc collectives rather than traditional representative groups. So we're seeing this reshaping of actors in the space, the reshaping of actors in the landscape. And this is a data visualization from Wired, basically outlining who's suing who. And I've highlighted the groups of individuals, these collectives, in orange. What's really interesting to me is that about half of the people, or half of the groups that are suing AI companies are not formal organisations, they're ad hoc collectives. So to me, this is incredibly interesting from a sociological point of view. Are we seeing the reshaping of organisations? A group of actors with perhaps more power in this resource conflict are platforms containing user-generated content. Think Reddit or Stack Overflow. And their position has generally been one of seeking to get a commercial benefit from AI companies who are harvesting their content for tokens, generally without consultation with or without any benefits flowing to the users who generate the content from their platforms. Reddit is one well-known case here, and it has entered into a content partnership with OpenAI, where OpenAI will pay Reddit for the content on its platform and use it to train GPT. And it means that Reddit won't allow Reddit content, the billions of tokens in Reddit, to be used by other parties. So we're seeing exclusivity raising the value of tokens. Stack Overflow took a very similar tack, and it essentially sold its user-generated content to OpenAI as well, just like Reddit. And again, there was user backlash, with many people deleting their posts in protest, another form of alateral damage. Don't know about you, but I'm on Stack Overflow nearly every day searching for things. And so now what we're seeing is people not writing content into Stack Overflow because it's getting harvested for AI. And I wonder what will happen in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time when everything has been vibe coded and someone's been, hired to undo or to bug fix all the vibe coding, and their main tool is going to be Stack Overflow. It'll be interesting to see. And for openness and transparency, I want to be clear that in response to this move, I deleted both my Reddit and Stack Overflow accounts. I can't remember how many points I had on Stack Overflow. It was a bit, but I was so angry I deleted both of those accounts. I want to be clear about my positionality in this space. And when we think of actors in the token wars, we may not immediately think of archival institutions, such as libraries, archives, museums and galleries, GLAM. But these institutions are caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, they often hold vast amounts of material, ripe for tokenizing, and they're often chronically underfunded. Often, not always. And a bucket of cash from an AI company would be very, very attractive. So how are they navigating this tension? One institution I want to point to here, already got the slide, is the National Film and Sound Archive up in Canberra. And they recently released their principles for machine learning and AI creation and use. And at the heart of these principles is maintaining trust, which means seeking consent from stakeholders and content creators about how the materials they've entrusted to the care of the institution are used for machine learning. And this, now you'll see exactly why I've used this example, because it's exactly the opposite approach to that of platforms like Reddit and Stack Overflow, who have destroyed stakeholder trust. Alateral damage. Turning now to private companies, and they tend to hold a lot of material, a lot of token data, privately. And their consideration is how to leverage that private information, often fragmented, disparate, different formats, so that it can be harnessed for AI. I just used a marketing buzzword, sorry. I promise this wasn't written by an LLM. AI companies have begun to find ways to address this challenge. Surprise! And access this private data. Shooketh. In November, we saw that Anthropic, the makers of Claude, released something called the Model Context Protocol. This is built as a way to, I'm directly quoting here, connect AI systems with data sources, replacing fragmented integrations with a single protocol to give AI systems access to the data they need. So that was my Kate 80 voice to distinguish it vocally from the rest of the presentation. Note the wording and the framing. It's the AI system that needs that clean, streamlined, well-formatted data now, not the AI company that sells the AI system or the company who owns the data. This is another form of alateral damage. The narrative around AI is changing to one of techno-determinism, one of inevitability. The AI system needs the data, so you need our product to feed the AI system the data as cleanly, as efficiently as possible, rather than questioning why the AI system needs more data or what problem the AI is solving in the first place.
Is that anything to do with better data training?
Yes. Yeah. So think Flower AI. Yep. Sort of. Model context. Sorry, you've nerd sniped me. I'm going to put a pin in it. I'll come back to it for questions. I promise I'll give you a question. So the AI companies are creating this narrative. If you don't connect your data, the narrative goes, your company will be left behind. They're creating a sense of urgency. You have to get your data into our AI system now, or what? Of course, one of the key actors in the token wars are AI model companies themselves, and their key goal is to harvest as many good, real, human-created tokens as possible from wherever they can get them under whatever licensing arrangement they can get away with to train their models. Again, I'm being polite. In general, they've used fair use provisions in US copyright law to claim that their actions here are valid and legal. However, many jurisdictions, like Australia, don't have fair use provisions in copyright law. So scraping websites for tokens, I'm not a lawyer, is likely to be in breach of the law in Australia. Sorry, this is too depressing. One of the other tactics we started to see from AI companies is the co-option of institutions, because getting data from private companies through model context protocol wasn't enough. So, for example, the Institutional Data Initiative is a partnership from Harvard and Microsoft to create a large public commons of data, creating a public good. On one hand, this is positive. I can see the positive signs here, because Microsoft is paying, contributing financially to this public commons, but it's also setting a precedent that might pressure other institutions to follow suit. And if you thought, hey Kathy, aren't there already large public data sets of the World Wide Web that have been created for AI training? You'd be absolutely correct. The most well-known of these is the Common Crawl dataset, which is a huge dataset of text scraped from the web made available for AI training, and a lot of the early LLMs used Common Crawl. But one of the reactions we've seen to the large-scale scraping of data, more alateral damage, is that many of the websites in Common Crawl, like news publishing websites, have blocked Common Crawl's bot, CC bot, because they want to sell their token data to AI companies exclusively, because that yields a higher price. And in turn, that action has adverse impacts for researchers. Oh, blessed be the person who turned up the air conditioning, thank you, who either now have to pay for the data that used to be in Common Crawl or find alternative data sets to use. So it's a second order consequence, a knock-on form of alateral damage, ripple effects. So what do regulators make of this situation? I mean, surely they can see this, right? Sorry, more depressing stuff. In Australia, there's increasing recognition that the developers of AI products need to be transparent about their use of copyrighted data when training models, as identified in the recent Senate Select Committee report on adopting artificial intelligence. And we do have voluntary guardrails which address managing data quality and provenance, but as yet we don't have any regulations other than copyright law to govern the use of data harvesting for tokens in Australia. So in my view, personal view, our regulations to prevent harvesting of tokens are very, very weak. And in other countries, we're already seeing regulators begin to tackle how to balance the competing interests of rights holders to be remunerated for content that is used for tokens with the demand for more investment and innovation with AI. They seem to be erring on the side of, and I'm directly quoting the UK government here, mainlining AI. Don't know about you, but the other things that you can mainline are not necessarily things that I want to touch technology with. So in summary, there are several actors who have tokens that AI companies want, and AI companies have a range of tactics to get those tokens. And in the middle are regulators trying to balance the interests of both sides. Who would have thought the humble token, a piece of data chopped up and turned into numbers, would be at the heart of such technical, legal and regulatory conflicts? And you can see now what I've done in parts 1 and 2 of this talk, as I've zoomed out from tokens as a technology to the tokenomics that are reshaping our world, the socio-technical systems of which tokens are a part. Pause. Fluffy bunnies. I need a fluffy bunny slide. So, in part 3, I get really practical and I turn attention, it's all you need, to tokens and data as a form of capital. And this is a quote from one of my favourite academic papers of all time, because I'm one of those people who has favourite academic papers, because you're a nerd. And the person in the Keep Calm and Hack On t-shirt, remind me later, I have the origin story of the Keep Calm meme, and it's a beautiful story. It involves my great aunt Bossy Boots, so remind me to tell you about that later. Sorry, pinball brain. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about tokens and data as a form of capital. And this paper was a landmark paper and was published in 2019. It's from Jathan Sadowski. He's at Monash. Incredible intellect. He casts data as a form of capital that's driving investment decisions, political decisions, and technological decisions. Somebody said the word power. And given the earlier sections of my talk, where I outlined why tokens are valuable and increasingly rare, we can see that we might want to protect our data assets, our token treasure, our taonga. And how do we usually protect our assets? We might store them securely, lock them up, prevent them from being stolen. And that's one option we have with data. We can put it behind a login or a paywall or an email wall, and that's what a lot of companies have done. They're privatising their data assets. So if we think back to Elinor Ostrom and the common pool, we're now seeing the increase of data as a private asset. So tokenomics and tokens are changing their economic class as an asset. But what if the value of your assets depends on them being in the open? For many artists and authors and creators, the value of the work, the value of their creations resides in them being on public display. And one tactic that's increasingly used for protecting data is data poisoning. Now it seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? I'm going to protect my data by poisoning it, but I'll explain. Data poisoning is where the training data, the tokens used for training a model, are altered in such a way, perturbed, so they alter the model during training, essentially tricking it into providing poisoned or incorrect outputs. Sorry. And two emerging tools here are Nightshade for data poisoning images, glorious, and Anti-Fake. Sorry, I have a mosquito around, it's about to get poisoned. And Anti-Fake for data poisoning speech. I tried Anti-Fake. I did a proof of concept with it on some NFSA audio-visual content. I don't know if I was doing something wrong, but the way it perturbed the speech, it was like I was speaking with a babbling brook behind me, so too much perturbation, but I want to dig into that a little bit more later on. For text content, like text on websites, we're seeing the emergence of a new type of tool called a tar pit. Nepenthes, which is named after a species of plant which I think traps prey and eats it. It's a beautiful name. It's a beautiful name. So Nepenthes is a tar pit tool, and the way it works is that it generates endless URLs for scrapers to follow. So it generates URLs on the fly in real time. So it's just an endless series of HTTP requests, 200 OK, and here's 5 gig of Markov babble. It's glorious, it's beautiful. I want to buy the person who made this a coffee. The downside with Nepenthes is that if you use it, your website probably won't get indexed by search engines because they're too busy going down all the Markov bubble pathways you've created for them. Yeah. Yep. It's amazing you've mentioned that because that's my next slide. No, this is prescient. this is flawless. One method that's become quite widely adopted here is using a CDN, a content delivery network, to protect content. One of the most popular is Cloudflare. It does have a free tier. Essentially, you place your web or app behind Cloudflare. People have to go through Cloudflare to get to your web or app, including anyone trying to scrape or harvest your content. There is a free tier, but if you have a large website, you'll find yourself paying a decent chunk of money to protect your content from AI scraping tools. So the burden of protecting against scraping has been put onto the website administrator. Other tools rely on robots text. So I'm not sure if there are any web server admins here. I know the Venn diagram of ML and web server admins is generally quite overlappy. But robots.txt, just in case, is a standard used by web servers and search engines, and it's a way for web servers to tell search engines and crawlers what not to index. So in this example, it's how I would block search engines from indexing WordPress admin pages, user agent, so anything. Yep.
Just quickly, came across the CDN thing because someone was saying the current range of crawlers is ignoring robots text. That used to be pretty effective on people play by rules.
And so with robots.txt, it only works if... I reckon someone's running an LLM, like a next slide prediction tool. This is brilliant. So tools that work with robots.txt only work if the user agent respects the robots.txt. TLDR, they don't. And I have proof. So I use a tool called Dark Visitors. I have some websites that I host myself because doing a PhD isn't enough pain and misery and suffering. So I had to find something to stop scrapers using I run on a tiny little cPanel shared host thing, right? Because I'll set up a VPS not until I submit my thesis. I'm not allowed to do any maintenance until I submit my thesis. Anyway, Dark Visitors gave me data to prove that many search engine crawlers, Applebot is one of them, are disrespecting the robots.txt directives. So here, at the top you can see Applebot is requesting robots.txt. Let me assure you that robots.txt is blocking Applebot. And it goes, whatever. And it goes and tries and scrapes my website anyway. Bad Applebot. So, I've lost where I am. I was going to say, can you tell me what my next slide is? So, there are two forms of alateral damage here. Unexpected, unintended distal side effects. So, firstly, as someone who hosts content on the web, I now have to care about yet another thing, fun, and put in place solutions like Cloudflare or Dark Visitors to prevent content from being harvested. So my recreational sysadmin burden just went up. Demand for tokens has caused more work for me and other sysadmins. And I can only imagine what people who are professional web content admins are doing to stop this scraping. I suspect it's a large percentage of their day job now. The second is more insidious, and it's illustrated by this graph from the Imperva bot report. The volume of traffic now served to non-human agents, scrapers, bots, token harvesters, now represents nearly half of most web servers' total traffic. That means we're using more power, more energy, more water. How does the thing go? More energy, I'll be good, to serve content to non-human actors. So both options, blocking the scrapers or serving the scrapers, requires more infrastructure and more human effort and more money. I'm sorry. There's one more thing that I want to cover before I wrap up my incredibly depressing talk today. And that's the concept of data sovereignty. Data sovereignty is about who controls, who manages, and who benefits from the data that's collected. And I want to call out here the relationship between AI models and cultural data, cultural language, cultural knowledge, cultural histories. the focus of the Indigenous data sovereignty movement, and ask the question, what right do AI companies have to cultural data, to cultural knowledge and cultural histories that are encoded through tokens? Who benefits when these tokens are transformed into large language models? The answers here aren't necessarily clear. LLMs encoding cultural language and data might help to preserve cultural language, but who owns them and controls them and profits from them? Tokens are treasure, they honour, and they're worth protecting. And it's another reason that we need to rethink what we place on the open web. So, in closing, I'm going to speculate a little bit around what our token futures might look like. In the short term, I think we're going to see a hunt for more tokens. Every app we use, every device we have, every interaction we do will be harvested for tokens due to the token crisis and how inferior synthetic data, AI slop, is. And in reaction, I think what we're going to see is more development of tools and techniques and tar pits to help protect our token treasure. We won't be limited to just a CDN solution or a plugin which enforces robots.txt or a tar pit which places scrapers down endless ravines of Markov bubble. I think we're going to see other data poisoning methods emerge for text-based content, integrated with content management systems. Nepenthes for WordPress. It will become harder for companies to harvest tokens, making them even rarer and more valuable. And I think we collectively as a society will begin to better understand the dynamic interactions wrought by tokens, the alateral damage and the distal effects, the unintended consequences of this resource conflict, and have a more nuanced understanding that we're still in the middle of the token wars. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kath. We have got time for a couple of questions. Who wants to start us off? Olivia.
Amazing talk. Like it is really interesting to see the perspective from like the data analysis and how it is affecting the economics as well. My question is, kind of a question: how people can be can defend their data sovereignty,
Yep.
Sovereignty, yes.
Yep.
When they don't even read the terms of conditions, when people send the data to YouTube, to close AI, to all the LLMs, but also to Facebook, and they use those systems without acknowledging that their data is going to be scrapped. How? What can we do with that?
Big question.
So there's this film called The Matrix. No, I don't really want to use the term red pill because it has other connotations, right? So I'm not going to use that analogy. Sorry. We are in an incredibly privileged position. We understand how LLMs work. We can whip up Python scrapey tools. We can whip up a GPU box and start training LLMs, and we can start using generative AI. We understand we can read through the hype, we can read through all of the marketing AI slop. But that also gives us a moral obligation. And it gives us a moral obligation to educate and open the eyes of the people around us who are endlessly scrolling on Facebook. I deleted my Facebook account at the end of last year. I'd had it for 15 years. It was really difficult to do. And I've never been prouder of myself because my tokens are no longer getting scraped by Meta and being used to perpetrate atrocities across the world. So I think the answer to that question is, when we have an understanding of ML and AI, we are then given a moral obligation that comes with that privilege, that comes with that education, to help other people see how their interactions are being monetized, how our attention is being harvested and monetized, and how we are being influenced and how our entire world is being shaped by algorithms. So I'm thinking here of Virginia Eubanks and automating inequality, and Cathy O'Neill, weapons of math destruction. We have that moral obligation. The problem is on us. Sorry, more depression.
We might go back here in the yellow hoodie.
Being a consumer, how a tokenization will help me?
So just the question you get into.
Sure.
Being a consumer, how would the tokenization help me?
Thank you. I'm not sure that it does. So if you think about how consumers use generative AI, consumers use generative AI at the moment for a range of tasks like creating cover letters for job applications or creating images of like the pop icon figures on LinkedIn. So there's an entertainment value, there's some productivity benefits, and I think what your question is perhaps getting to is, does the value of tokens result in a net benefit for consumers which offsets some of the concerns and questions about how tokens are being harvested? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that for consumers, like anything we buy or like anything we use, having a good understanding of the supply chain that's involved in a product that we use or engage with means that we have to be conscientious consumers. I can use AI unconscientiously. I can generate marketing stuff on a website, or I can create, I'm not sure that I'd want to create hey ChatGPT, create the pop icon dolls of an incredibly cynical middle-aged academic. With a quill and paper and not a GPU in sight. So I think as consumers we have to be more conscientious of how we're consuming AI and understand, just as I want to know whether my chocolate, the chocolate bar that's excludable and rivalrous that no one can touch, I want to know whether that's fair trade and organic. When I use ChatGPT or I use a generative AI model, what's the supply chain behind it? I think Kate Crawford and Vlad and Jola have done some incredible work here with their Anatomy of AI system, and Kate Crawford's new book, Calculating Empires, digs very deeply into that supply chain question as well. Excellent question.
You had a question, Greg?
Yep. First of all, great talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not optimistic about education and raising awareness having any meaningful impact on this problem. Just because those of us who actually care tend to be a minority. If you don't have a critical mass of the population, you're not going to be able to make a difference. And the mechanics of getting that to happen in the time frames that are realistic doesn't seem realistic to me. So, as someone who's at ANU, how much do you see about, how many signs do you see of people in government, the regulators, people with actual power to make rules, engaging with the stuff and getting themselves an understanding of what the actual issues are? How much evidence do you see of that?
Well, I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say that may be internal, and I'm being recorded. So I'm going to choose my words very carefully here. First of all, excellent question. ANU is engaging deeply with government, and in fact, I'm with the School of Cybernetics, and we run a master's program in applied cybernetics. This is not a marketing pitch, but a number of government departments fund their staff to do that master's course, and part of the reason why they do that is because we cover the systems thinking, the socio-technical systems, what is the societal impact of this seemingly innocuous technology called a token that is just chopped up and turned into numbers. So I would answer that question by saying we're engaging very deeply with government, and I have been incredibly heartened by how much government is getting this. And I would like to think that the challenge that we have with regulations in this country is not because there's not focus on the issue. It's because I think there's a lot of deep thinking and a lot of wrestling and a lot of deep wrangling going on in government about how do we best govern AI while we also reap the productivity and the financial and economic benefits of AI, and at the same time protecting our Australian culture, our Australian cultures, because there's more than one of them. And I think that's a conversation that's very active in government at the moment, and I'm hoping that the time it's taking to do good regulation is because there are many sets of conversations happening in government. I'm not optimistic, I'm hopeful.
Alright, we've got about 5 minutes, we'll just make it to a couple more coming next, Jen.
Thank you so much for that talk. I'm wondering, you spoke about Reddit and Stack Overflow, and I think we all know there are several other major social media platforms who willingly give away the data of their users to the highest bidder. My question is, do you think in the future we're likely to see an exodus from those types of platforms when people realise that they're being exploited? And if you believe that something like that is likely to happen, what will the alternatives look like for people who still want to use social media and still want to, communicate digitally and have content available online? What will the future state look like for you?
So there's two different answers to that question. There's two possible timelines there, Jamie. So in timeline 1, people wake up and they realise that social media companies are trying to shift their political opinions and sell them products when they can emotionally detect that they're most in need of products. Sarah Winter's book at the moment, I can't remember the name of it, but basically here's how Facebook is being essentially a bit rubbish at scale. So in timeline 1, people wake up to that fact and they realise that sovereign, I don't like the term sovereign because it's contested, sovereignty was never ceded. I'm going to use a different term. They realise that self-hosted social media that doesn't have an advertising imperative might be the way to go. I'm really heartened by some of the work that's happening in Germany and sorry, I'm trying to figure out what the English word is for that country. Next to Germany, speaks Dutch, Holland. Sorry. So there's some work going on in Holland where government departments have gone to Mastodon instead of Twitter or Blue Sky, and I'd love to see some more federated open source work in that space, but I have an open source bias. I come from an open source background. I use Linux by choice. So I think that's timeline 1. I like timeline 1. I'd love to live in timeline 1. I don't think timeline 1 will happen. In timeline 2, we have the various books of face, scraping content, addicting people with, dark patterns, attention seeking, ads, advertising. We have Google Chrome now that blocks uBlock and all of the ad blocking software. So there's another talk and another war going on between ad blocking and ad platforms. And I think what we're going to see there is you can't use the internet unless you agree to use all of the advertising stuff that comes with the browser. And I can't comment on Firefox because I'm a Mozilla contractor and I'm NDA'd.
Alright, we are just at time, guys, so we will do 2 more. Yourself in the back here, sir, and then this man here. We'll ask you just as quick as you can, please, in the back.
Just given the recent rise of MIT licensed LLMs and LLMs that can be installed on local machines, how that will affect the web scraping capabilities of the tokenization, because you can actually keep noded your data basically and use that. Is that going to change how we are utilizing the models?
So first of all, that's an incredibly good question. With the rise of LLMs that I can use on a laptop or a desktop, does that negate the need for cloud-based LLMs and therefore negate the need for scraping? I'd like to say that's one path through here. But we have large players in this space, like the Tech Council of Australia, taking the position that we don't need to do any of that work because the existing players in the field are good enough for our purposes. Of course, they have a vested interest in saying that because the people who have those large models are their key clients. So I think that there's definitely a space in the landscape for local models and private models. I think we have very limited talent in Australia capable of developing those and developing them in a way that's sustainable, responsible, at scale. So I think the talent pipeline is a challenge as well, but I think I'd like to see them as part of the options that are being considered. Good question.
Lucky one, so as much as you can, quick as you can.
Okay. With many popular tools that we require to use in our daily lives, work, etc., like email, for example, or even filing of text, or even on the OAIC's website, requires that we agree to privacy policies that transfer data to third-party companies that are harvesting tokens. We know a few big ones. Do we have a choice in opting out of surrendering our token and sovereignty without excluding ourselves from participating in society, such as being able to file taxes online? What can we do?
Yes, the old technical pathway, junior engineer, mid-range engineer, senior engineer, goat farmer. So I think it's a really powerful question. And I think the answer is there are very few means and very few escape hatches that we have at the moment. I host a Mastodon server because I can, right?
Me also too.
No, I don't do Oz Social. I do Fediverse AU. Shlee does Oz.social. They are incredible person. We need to give people the tools to be able to see some of those escape hatches for themselves. But the situation we're in at the moment is our lives are completely imbricated and embedded in some of these massive social platforms. So I'm a knitter because using Linux and talking about LLMs is not nerdy enough. So for fun, I go and knit. Binary, zeros, ones, knit and purl. My knitting group organises on Facebook, and because I'm not on Facebook, I'm dependent on people messaging me to say, hey, knitting's on. We have a situation at the moment where we can't live our lives in a private way because of the system we've created. But allegedly, we're in a democracy. So what we should be able to do, well, America isn't anymore, right? So, different talk. So what we should be able to do is say to government, we want more options. And so Carly Kind, the the Privacy Commissioner, and Julie Grant, the E-Safety Commissioner, they're starting to do some of this work and starting to put some heavier regulation on systems. But what I'm not seeing are the structural changes, the infrastructure changes that allow us to lead digital lives more privately without being harvested for tokens. Powerful question.
So I'll have to leave it there. Please come along to the pub off. You going to join us, guys?
Possibly.
Possibly. Possibly we'll be able to have a chance to talk about it further. Thank you very much, Kathy. It would be best of luck getting your knitting group onto a Signal group chat.
I got my mum onto Signal group chat.
That's an achievement.